Thank you so much. Steve Pratt.
Thank you. Thank you. And I just want to follow up on what Jason was saying earlier about the F1 car. I feel like Jason and Sheng, who are coming up next, are going to be the engine and the team and all this sort of stuff. I'm the tires guy. So I'm going to be a little different on this one. I want to start by asking you to imagine that it is medieval times. And I have very good news. All of you are in possession of a chest of gold coins. It's not all good news because everyone else in the kingdom knows that you have these gold coins. In fact, there's a horde of marauders who've dedicated their entire existence to trying to steal your gold coins. And so like any smart person, you have created a strategy to defend your gold coins and your treasure, and you've built yourself a fort. The problem is, the horde of marauders shows up every single day outside your fort and attacks it and tries to get in and steal your coins. And they are relentless. They've got battering rams, they're shooting flaming arrows over the walls, and you're trying to defend yourself. You're pouring cauldrons of oil over the side. You've got a boat filled with alligators. All day, every day, you're battling to protect your coins. And every day, more and more marauders show up outside. It's exhausting. It's also not a fairy tale. This is actually happening to every single one of us, every single day. The gold coins are your very limited and finite time and attention. And the fort are all the defenses that you've built up to shield yourself from messages that you don't want to pay attention to. The marauders outside trying to get in, those are advertisers and marketers and content creators who are very, very excited to try and get you to give them your time and attention for their message. It's a full-on attention war. Our attention is under siege. And every single day, it's a battle for control over who gets in and who gets left out. The problem is, in this room, it's kind of complicated because personally, we all have our own attention forts and we're all guarding our own attention very fiercely. But professionally, we're all sales and marketing people, so we're also the marauders. Our jobs are to try and help other people get into attention forts and steal their gold coins. And it's really hard, and because it's our jobs, and we take it really, really seriously, we are getting craftier and craftier and craftier with how we try and get into the forts. So instead of battering rams, we are battering people's eardrums with pre-rolls and mid-rolls and post-rolls and podcasts and hosts trying to get us to buy supplements and cold plunges and saunas and all those sorts of things. And instead of the barrage of flaming arrows, we are barraging people with AI-generated clips and pop-up ads and huge numbers of unsolicited LinkedIn in-mail requests. I don't know if you all get as many of these as I do. It's not working very well. Like, we're not getting into very many attention forts, at least as many as we could. And it's because audiences and consumers have built up really good defenses around their attention forts. So, instead of having a moat filled with alligators, we've got skip buttons and ad blockers and VPNs. And instead of pouring cauldrons of boiling oil over the side of the walls, we're paying for subscription services to avoid the messages that we don't want altogether. It's really, really hard to get into an attention fort. And I think if you think about yourself, again, as an audience member or a consumer, we're getting pickier and pickier and pickier because we don't have to let anything into the fort that we don't want to. How hard is it? And this is a good point from Jason, because I couldn't find any data about this for radio. I think radio is going to perform a lot better than some of these digital things are, but the tiny little yellow or orange slivers, that's the conversion rate. That's success in digital marketing. Like, I don't know where else we'd be fine saying like 1% is a good success rate, or where 99% of the people that are, we've targeted is acceptable. But to me, this says something. It says that there's either the wrong people that we're targeting, or it's not the right time for them to be the right, recipients of the messages, or we're actually just annoying people. It's kind of depressing. Whoops. So one of the questions you're probably asking yourself is, how do we actually get into the attention fort? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And how do we do it without making the owners of the fort angry and resentful? So this is the state of the attention war today. This blue line here that keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger over time is the number of messages that we are all exposed to every single day. And it's going to keep getting bigger too. This is not just content, it's all of our advertising and marketing messages are the blue line. The little red line here is the wall of the attention fort. It's fixed. We only have a finite amount of time and attention. That is the maximum number of messages that a human can possibly consume in a day. So after time keeps going on, there's more and more competition for the same amount of time and attention. Our job as advertisers and marketers selling attention is to get below the red line. If we're above the red line, it means the attention fort is doing its job. And unfortunately, our advertising and marketing is ineffective and wasted money. It means that we're being ignored. And if there's one thing that we know in this room, we cannot afford to be ignored. Otherwise, we're not going to be doing so well in our jobs. A little bit more bad news. I promise I'm going to get to some good stuff. But there's other people trying to get into the fort. We're also competing against YouTube and Netflix and TikTok and Instagram. Emails and Slack messages and text messages want to get into the fort. There might even be presenters at conferences in Athens trying to get into your attention forts right now. There's a lot of things competing for time and attention, and we're just one of them, which means that we have to be really, really smart about how we get in. There is one group that is doing things very differently, though. They're waltzing into the fort and being given gold coins. How are they doing it? And who are these people? They're asking themselves a very different set of questions. They're saying, what if we decided to stop attacking the fort? And instead, what if we tried to get invited inside? What would it look like if we tried to be wanted instead of wanted, or unwanted rather, or compelling instead of skippable? What would it look like if we became a friend of the fort? A friend of the fort is welcomed with open arms. A friend of the fort is seen as an ally and not a threat. A friend of the fort is trusted instead of feared or worried about. All your marketing and advertising goals are much, much easier to achieve when you're a friend of the fort. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But I just wanted to tell you why I'm talking about this stuff. I was actually in audio sales for over a decade. I was one of the co-founders of the first branded podcast company in the world, a company called Pacific Content. And I spent 10 years working with brands to try and help them figure out how to earn more attention and how to do things differently. And the things I want to talk about today are the things that actually worked. We did a ton of experiments. Some of them were horrible, some of them didn't work. These are all the things that worked over and over and over again for all of us. So we're going to go through 5 fort strategies, 5 ways to become a friend of the fort. But first, we're going to take a short break and hear a message from our sponsors and our friends at Log Sleep Mattresses.
This presentation is brought to you by Log Sleep Mattresses. Other mattresses have memory foam, cooling gels, or show up in a box. But no other mattress emits time-released melatonin mist to make sure you sleep like a log. Go to logsleeping.com and enter coupon code EARNITBOOKSLEEP to get 10% off your mattress.
Welcome back to the attention presentation. I'm Steve Pratt. That was weird, right? Like, that was really weird. Hearing an ad in the middle of a presentation. That had nothing to do with the presentation, and none of you came here to hear about melatonin mist mattresses, so I apologize for that. Imagine that there were 5 more of them that I played right now before I kept on with the presentation. That is our default strategy for getting into the attention fort. And the problem with it, in a way, is that this is about what the melatonin mattress wants and not what the audience wants, which comes to our first strategy for getting into the fort, which is to give a great gift. We want attention from people, and usually it's to talk about ourselves. The opportunity that the people who get invited into the fort is that they do something different, is they think about the owners of the fort first. So if you bring a great gift, and the gift is researched and designed for the people who are inside the fort, and you bring it to the fort, you can get right invited inside the back door and waltz in. What does the gift have to do with marketing? So this graph for me is how to keep your job in ad sales or marketing sales and find advertising and marketing success. The job is kind of the reason we're doing the marketing or the advertising with the brand. That's why they're doing it. It might be brand awareness, it might be brand positioning, it might be net promoter score. There's all sorts of different jobs that brands hire marketing and advertising to do. We obviously have to know what that is, but if we only focus on that, it's going to be seen as transactional, and it's going to be ignored because people don't want to hear that. That's not the thing that they're signing up for most of the time. The new part is this idea of the gift, which is something that is truly actually valued by the people you're trying to reach, something that's going to benefit their lives, that they're excited to receive. But if we only focus on the gift, it's not actually going to do anything for our business results. So the secret here is to find balance between the job and the gift. And what we're going to talk about is how to design a gift that accomplishes your marketing job. And I feel like at this point, you may be saying, I know where this is going, Steve. We're in Athens. You're talking about a fort, and you're talking about armies attacking the fort. And now you're talking about gifts. You're probably talking about a Trojan horse. Except it's not a Trojan horse, because a Trojan horse is kind of a bait and switch. A Trojan horse is a thing where you go inside and then you try and take over the fort from the inside, and it's not a good gift when you go in and try and hijack the fort. The horse is literally full of murderers. So in a marketing sense, this is like just a wooden lie on wheels where there's going to be a bunch of pushy salespeople that come out and start trying to hard close you as soon as you get inside the fort. So what we actually are going to talk about is not Trojan horses and avoiding Trojan horses and developing real great gifts. What does that look like? It means creating real value. And I'm going to tell you the story of maybe my favorite one that I got a chance to work on. When I was at this podcast company, we worked with the team at Dell Technologies right after they merged Dell, EMC, VMware, and a whole bunch of companies to form this new brand called Dell Technologies. And they hired us to come down because they wanted to change the positioning of their brand with C-suite executives. They wanted them to think differently about what Dell Technologies stood for, not just desktops and laptops and servers. They wanted people to know that they were actual experts in digital innovation, disruption, and transformation. And they had done a ton of research on this C-suite crowd. We went down and met them in their Texas office, and this VP of marketing, JC Gamma, showed us all this amazing research about C-suite executives. And they were like, we do not want to hear tips and tricks and listicles. We don't want any shallow stuff. What we actually want are real insights from people who've been in our jobs, in our shoes, in industries that have been disrupted, to figure out how they thought about it and how they handled it and what happened. So we used that and created a gift for the C-suite executives. We gave them exactly what they were asking for. We made a show called Trailblazers, and every episode was the history of disruption, innovation in a particular industry told by the people who were in it. It was a really good gift. But JC and his team made two really, really bold decisions that probably could have got them all fired in pursuit of making this a much better gift, a gift that was from them and not about them. The first one is that if you think about this, if you're making a great gift and you're Dell Technologies, you probably want to wrap it all in as much Dell wrapping paper as you possibly can. And so you think about who should the host of this show be? The obvious answer would be Michael Dell, the CEO and founder of Dell Technologies. Very visible founder, super smart, could interview anybody. He'd be a great host. But JC and his team were like, you know what? If we do that, it's going to feel like a Trojan horse to people. They're going to be worried it's a Trojan horse, that this is a show about Dell Technologies, and this is actually a really good show designed for C-suite executives. Let's look at another host who's the best possible host, who stands for innovation and disruption expertise. And we landed on Walter Isaacson. Unfortunately, it was my job to try and get Walter Isaacson to host this show, and I had no idea how to do it. Honestly, it's a boring story because it was actually much easier than I thought. I Googled where he was working, and he was at the Aspen Institute at the time. And I Googled the Aspen Institute and asked to speak to Walter Isaacson. And they put me through, and I asked if he wanted to host a podcast for Dell, and he said yes. So we had to pay him, of course. But having Walter Isaacson as the host of this show, huge impact on this being seen as a real show and a real gift for C-suite audiences. The next thing is, I don't know if you can see anything wrong with this podcast art logo. There's something really wrong with it. There's things that are missing. There's no Dell logo anywhere on this. And this is what would show up in podcast directories, no logos. And again, this was JC and his team saying, if we put a logo on here, people are going to think it's an ad for Dell, and they're probably not going to listen. And our goal is to actually get people to click and start listening to this thing and understand it's a really good show. The only mention of Dell Technologies in this whole show took place like a minute, 2 minutes into the show when Walter Isaacson said this.
I'm Walter Isaacson, and this is Trailblazers, an original podcast from Dell Technologies.
An original podcast from Dell Technologies. From Dell Technologies, not about Dell Technologies. That's the big lesson from all this. And and honestly, this was such a big risk for JC and his team, because if that didn't work, they were going to get fired, because the whole job is brand positioning. And if people didn't know it was Dell Technologies that made the show, the whole thing's a waste of money. So the job was to change the positioning. The gift was C-suite education with this thing. The good news is it worked really, really well. The show commercially did really well. It had millions and millions of downloads. It was around for a number of different seasons. It won a bunch of awards. Its curriculum in an MBA program. But the best part is we worked on research with this with a company called Signal Hill Insights, and they did a panel of a test and control group of C-suite executives, a single exposure, one episode to this show. And the C-suite executives knew who made the show. They knew it was Dell Technologies. They liked Dell Technologies more for making a show that was a real show. And they associated Dell more strongly with innovation and disruption expertise. This is a gift that did the job in a really big way, and also earned JC a promotion, which is very nice as well. Here are the questions you could ask yourself about whether you're making a great gift. First of all, is it from you or about you? If it's from you, it's probably a gift. If it's about you, it's probably a transaction that's going to get ignored. Would you tell other people about this if you didn't produce it or you weren't part of selling it? This is a really high bar, right? When we talk about word of mouth and how people recommend things to each other, imagine how your quality standard would have to change if you designed it to be so good that people talked about it and told each other about it in your target audience. Same thing with remembering it. Would people remember this in a month, a year, 5 years? How would your strategy for putting messaging, again, whether it's advertising, marketing, content, anything like that, change if you're designing something to be remembered in 5 years instead of 5 seconds? It's a really, really big difference that changes the sorts of things you put out. And then maybe my favorite one, will this be considered time well spent? So at the end of spending time with you and your messaging, are people going to say that was a good use of my time? If they could go back in a time machine and make the same decision again, would they choose to make the same decision because it was valuable for them? That's the test of whether you're going to actually earn attention and make sure that people come back a second time, a third time, over and over and over again. If it feels like a Trojan horse, they're there once and they're never coming back. So strategy number 2 is very different. Lonely forts and personalized gifts. So if I gave you all a choice between getting the exact same gift as 100,000 or 1 million other people, or I gave you the choice of getting a gift that was personalized and customized just for you, it's pretty obvious which one you would choose, right? Are there opportunities in any of your jobs to think about how to find some forts that are not very popular, to find some forts where there are no marauders outside, and then to think about how you could create a super highly valuable gift for that group of people? If you do, they're going to love you forever. I'm going to tell you a story about the weirdest podcast that I have ever heard that comes from Charles Schwab, which is a US investment firm. This is the most specific thing I've ever heard in my life. There's a group of people in the US who are investment advisors who work inside large firms who are considering leaving the large firms and becoming independent investment advisors and are looking for advice about how to do it, and they don't know how to do it. This podcast is just for them. Charles Schwab makes a bunch of systems that help independent advisors, kind of their back office, to set up and provide support for them. And they know that there's a bunch of people sitting in these firms who don't know how to go out on their own and set up their own shingle. And so they made a podcast that was kind of like a guidebook for how to do that. And honestly, if you're interested in listening to this show and you're not an investment advisor, you should probably talk to your doctor, because there's something wrong with you. It's a really very specific show. The job of it is to create more of these independent investment advisors to get people to make the decision to leave and go do this because Charles Schwab will get all their back-end support businesses for them. And the gift they did was an education series about teaching these people how to do it. They only needed one person to leave their job and go become an investment advisor to pay for the whole series, and everything after that was all gravy. In this case, it worked very well. The gift accomplished the job. So some of the questions you might ask for yourself are you trying to get into the same attention forts as everybody else? Which is going to be really hard to get them to choose you. Could you target any smaller ones where there's more opportunity? And which group of people would love you if you designed a very personalized, customized gift for them? Friend of the Fort strategy number 3, gift differentiation. There's a lot of pressure to follow what's popular and what's conventional and what's trending out there. But when you do the same things as everybody else, there's less reason to choose you compared to all the rest of the competition. One of the most interesting things about a gift, I think, is when you give a gift that can only come from you. And so we're going to talk a little bit around how to differentiate your gift by leaning into what makes you or your clients more interesting. If the gift is from you and not about you, you have to kind of know who you are first. And so I want to talk to you about something really boring, maybe the most boring product on earth. Can you imagine how you would get people excited about oat milk? I can just see that, like, no, everyone's asleep already. I just said oat milk and you almost all went to sleep. I'm excited about oat milk. Like, I'm very excited about oat milk. I'm up here at a conference talking to you about oat milk because Oatly has done a really, really, really good job of getting me excited about oat milk. And one of the ways they did it was by leaning into their unique set of beliefs and values. This is a company that believes in the oat milk story very, very strongly, and they're not shy to tell their very unique story. So this billboard here, it's like milk but made for humans, obviously implying that their milk is made for humans, regular milk is made for baby cows. It's not going to be for everybody. They've got a whole section on their website about what they believe. This is kind of their manifesto. And if you look up here, we are a company that has some pretty strong opinions. Down here, so for the record, we believe we should grow stuff to eat instead of growing stuff to feed animals that we then eat. This is for a very specific group of people, and they're not shy about telling their story. They've got a whole series of things called infrequently asked questions, which I love, because again, this is kind of defining a new category of helping people understand what oat milk is and why you may want to try it. And these are the kind of questions where they've actually got an enormous amount of copy answering these questions in a really fun way that explain the benefit of oat milk. When I saw this, do I need a different mouth to drink oat milk on a carton, I read all the copy on it. Like their cartons are just filled with copy, and it's fun to read it because they've got a point of view and they're having fun telling their story. There's also a section on the website that tells you what their attention fort strategy is. This is what they're trying to do. I can't tell if I hate these or love these, but I'm intrigued by this oat stuff they speak of. That's sort of what we're going for. I love that they're so upfront and honest about this. And then the last thing, because we're an audio group, they also love jingles. There's like 13 or 15 or something like this on their site.
Oat
I'll
drink
play
is
one
like
now.
milk, but it's made from oats instead of a cow. Now that you know, here's a jingle to help you remember that our name is Oatly.
O-A-T-L-Y !
There's a whole bunch of them. So if you want to go, I highly recommend going and listening to a whole bunch of weird Oatly jingles. The next one is even weirder. Like, can you imagine the most awkward thing to market on the planet? What would happen if your product is something that people don't really want to talk about very much? I'm talking about spray to mask the smell of your own poop. Okay? Can you imagine if that was your marketing job and that was what you were given, was to get people excited about spray to mask the smell of human waste? I'm excited about it. I'm up here talking about it at the conference. I'm going to spend a fair bit amount of time talking about poop spray because Poopery has done a really, really, really good job making it fun. They have leaned into all the things that were all awkward to talk about, and they're having a ball with it. Instead of avoiding it, they have kind of just plunged right into the toilet with a lot of excitement and vigor. So This is their product descriptions. This is Sugar Toasted Toots, the perfect recipe of sugary, sweet notes of vanilla, warm coconut, and a garnish of mint that leave your freshly baked number twos smelling like fresh out of the oven cookies. This is great copywriting. Here's a construction-themed spray called Heavy Duty, which leaves you feeling and smelling like you're pooping in a brand new, freshly built bathroom every single time, which is way cheaper than buying a new house every time you poop. You're welcome. They've got bulk packs. For the fancy pooper, there's the Dapper Crapper pack. And again, with the construction theme, you can buy this toolbox set called Power Stools. I love it. Like, these are a lot of poop jokes and a lot of bad poop puns. Can you imagine being another poop spray competing against this? This is a group that has owned their voice and made something that is truly memorable and, again, word of mouth worthy. And look at what their audience does. When you have fun, I'm not even going to read these out loud because this is being recorded, but like, you can read these. These are the greatest. This is a lot of passion for an audience publicly talking about poop spray. Good on you, poopery. So I think some of the questions if you're thinking about yourself or your clients that can help you figure out how to do some of these things is to think about, who are you? Why does your brand exist? What are your values? What's your voice? What makes you exceptional and what makes you different? And instead of avoiding it and trying to fit in with everybody else, to think about how can you double down on it and make it hard for everybody else to stand out because you're the only one doing what you're doing. You're giving a gift that can only come from you. Strategy number 4, gift wrapping. If you're going to give a gift, it's usually wrapped. And if you have boring wrapping paper, it's generally a sign that it's a crappy gift. Like, nobody's excited to open this one, right? Like, that just looks like a horrible gift. If you have really creative, fancy wrapping paper, what does it do? It stands out, it's memorable, it makes me curious about what's inside, and I want to open it. And that's exactly what we all want to do with all of our messages, and whether it's advertising or marketing or content. And in marketing and content and advertising, this is about the format or the stories that we tell around the information that we want to share. Sometimes you can take the exact same information and package it in a really fun way and wrap it in that, and that's the thing that helps you get into the attention for it. So I had never heard of this cereal. I'm Canadian, I'm from Vancouver. I'd never heard of this UK-based cereal until this fall. Where did I find out about them? It was on the least exciting creative space on earth, and the most unlikely place on earth that I would ever find out about a breakfast cereal. It was on LinkedIn. This is what I found. Somebody forwarded this to me on LinkedIn. So this is a word of mouth. This is actually somebody sharing this voluntarily with me because they loved it. We are not a cat food company. Listen up, we're a cereal company, not cat food. I'm instantly hooked. Like, do you not want to know what this story is? As much like just with that, like, I was like, okay, I've got to click on it. What happens when I click on it? It's a 40-page carousel that looks like it was designed in Microsoft Paint for $0. And it tells the story of why they're confused with cat food. They post pictures of animals because they perform better than their advertisements do. There's a lot of cats, and so people think that they're a cat food company. I went through all 40 pages. And at the end of it, my time well spent test was a big yes. I was very happy. I was entertained. It was a great story. And the best thing is, at the end of going through 40 pages of a LinkedIn carousel, I now know the things that I would not know if it was an ad that I skipped. I know who Cereal is. I know that they're a cereal company, that they're nutritious, delicious, and they're high in protein. Nicely done with a great wrapping job. So how can you wrap your gifts in a unique format? Can you wrap your gift with stories in a creative way? And can you use it to create curiosity and anticipation? There's all sorts of different formats and ways that you can do this stuff. This is where the tires of the F1 car are the different ways that you can do this stuff. And then I'm going to leave you with the worst one of all. And I think no one's going to like this. You're not going to like it. Your boss is not going to like it. Your clients are not going to like it. But it is true, and I have to say it, because it is the uncomfortable truth, is that it is patience. Everybody wants results now. They want short-term results. They want things to deliver sales within the next quarter. This is also where the 1% success rate comes from, is from the short-term stuff. Being consistently great and generous and giving gifts over and over and over again creates trust. You can't just buy trust, you have to earn it, and earning it takes time. Trust turns into relationships, and when people are ready to buy, they're going to buy from people that they already trust and they have a relationship with. So I don't know, there's some stat out there in B2B marketing that 95% of people in the market are not ready to buy. That's why this matters. When they are ready to buy, they've already spent tons of time with you and they're ready to do it. I learned this lesson very early on in the podcast company from Slack. We worked with a CMO named Bill Masitis, who was super, super smart. They had research that showed it took 10 to 15 different phenomenal brand touch points before somebody would sign up for a team with Slack. And they knew that if they made an amazing gift, a from you, not about you show from Slack, and they published it on a regular cadence, that they could put customer acquisition on a schedule. And so we made that show. It delivered over and over and over again. They knew the data about customer acquisition, taking those many touch points. The gift is the phenomenal touch point that you can just give people over and over again to build up trust. I think you know how the story ends. If you don't, Slack sold to Salesforce for $27 billion. And I'm pretty sure it's because of our podcast. It's the big reason. So as I wrap up, we'll go back to this graph. That line is going to get bigger. The blue line is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, especially with AI. The red line is going to stay the same. So our job as advertisers and marketers is to get into the attention fort. We have to give great gifts and get invited into the fort instead of attacking it. And these are the strategies we can use to do it. We can make from you, not about you gifts like Dell Technologies did. We can do personalized gifts to lonely forts like the Very Strange Investment Show from Charles Schwab. We can do differentiated gifts like Oatly and Poopery. We can wrap the gift to make it special like Surreal Cereal. And we can have patience. That's how you get into the attention fort. It is better to be a friend of the fort. I hope that as you leave here and go think about your advertising and marketing plans for 2025, that you make a commitment to not be one of the gazillions of messages that get ignored, and then instead you work on making great gifts that are going to get you invited into the fort. I would encourage you to be brave, be generous, be creative, be memorable. Don't be a Trojan horse full of murderers, and be a friend of the fort. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. That was really time well spent, I think.
It's stressful, like even having to live up to that, don't it?
Absolutely. Sheng, if you, I can do some questions with Steve, and in the meantime, we all stay inside. Given all your experience with branded podcast, how do you see the role of audio content evolving in the context of earner consumer attention? And do you see a difference for podcast content or podcast ads in comparison with other content forms in earning attention?
It's funny, I was talking with Sheng about this right before you started. That audio is like the best medium. Like when I was selling podcasts, the amount of time and attention is the number one selling point for audio. Like if I went to almost any marketer and said, how would you like to have half an hour at like an 85 to 95% completion rate in your target audience's ears over and over and over and over again? Where can you get a half hour of dedicated time and attention anywhere else? They can barely get a 30% completion rate on like a 1 or 2 minute YouTube video. Like audio is amazing. Like it's a really, really powerful medium for holding attention and getting a lot of it. I think that's one of the selling points for everybody to kind of double down on. And I think
I can imagine with the voice being so human and so real.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And the context that people listen to audio in are very different than screen-based mediums, where they've got a lot of time and attention and really give it their full attention while they're doing background other things,
Yeah. Looking at the audience, are there any questions right now? Actually, Steve, you're going to have a show again Tuesday in track 3.
2, I think?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
Just, it's not exactly the same show. It's like a podcast, you do another show. But it's, of course, always around attention and grabbing it. I would like to thank you for all the attention you gave us and to learn how to be give gifts. And I'd like to introduce you in just one sentence more to Sheng Song. Sheng Song is a research consultant from Ster. He specializes in advertising effectiveness, and of course he's advocating radio's impact and turning insights into actionable strategies for brands. Well, Sheng, there's a lot to live up.
Thank you.
I hope you will do. I'm sure you will do. So, Sheng Song, go ahead.
Thank you. Is it up or down that I have to? Down, thanks. Sorry, guys, I don't have a race car metaphor, so this unfortunately dies with me. I do have this. If it works. I realized today that I'm right before lunch, so I'm sorry if you're starting to get hungry. But welcome to the kitchen. And before I start with my story, I have a quick question for you all. Do we have any people in the audience who love to cook? A culinary bunch. And do we have people who do not like to cook, who hate it? Nice. Okay. Good. I'm not alone. I'm a terrible cook. I can cut ingredients. I can slice up some things, but my food is never really that good. And the one thing I have a lot of trouble with, it's salt. I can follow a recipe to some extent, cut up ingredients, and a lot of recipes write out the stuff you need in very much detail, in a teaspoon of this or how many grams of that. Except for salt. Salt is always written like a pinch of salt or a small pinch of salt. I have no idea how much it is. And that is such a waste of all the effort I've put in making the food, because in the end, it ends up tasting very bland. It tastes like nothing, which is very sad for me. Luckily, I have a partner who's very good at cooking and always helps me add the actual amount of salt that I need. But a pinch of salt is one of my Achilles heels. Well, in a lot of ways, you can compare making a meal or prepping a food with how a media schedule is made. You have your ingredients, you have the creative, you have the brand position, you have the share of voice. All these different things combine into one meal. And the salt in a media campaign you can see as the contact frequency, or how many exposures you need for a campaign to taste good, to not taste bland. And one question we always get asked in this context is, well, what is a pinch of salt? Or in media terms, what is the optimal contact frequency that you need? Especially in this world where we're really filled with a lot of different types of distraction. Full attention, as Steve said, is very rare. We have this fort that protects us from unwanted attention, making people go into a more default mode of being distracted. So when you're watching TV or when you're listening to the radio, it runs in the background. You're doing something else while it's running, especially when it comes to advertising. People are not really actively looking for advertising. People are not seeking it out, and they tend to consume it in a more distracted manner. We've done several neuroscience studies into the effect of attention and how it works for radio and how it works for TV. And one of the studies we did, we compared a group of people who were paying full attention to advertising, and we compared them with people who were distracted. So maybe a bit more natural way of consuming advertising. And we found something very interesting. Even though people might be distracted, sometimes it can actually be a good thing for advertising. When we compare those two groups, we found that in some cases, people who are distracted have actually a stronger brand effect than people who are paying full attention to the advertising. And it can be explained with the phenomenon in psychology that's called the sleeper effect. And to bring up your fort again, the sleeper effect says that your defenses are sleeping. So when you're distracted, your defenses are down. You're not really thinking really critically of a brand message that's being said. So when you're paying full attention, you might think of, when you hear the slogan of Gillette, the best a man can get, you might be thinking about it more critically. Is it really the best you can get? Maybe you're thinking of counter arguments against buying it when you're paying full attention. But when you're distracted, when you're not really paying full attention to what's being said, it runs in the background, slowly it comes to you, and you might even sing along to the jingle while it's playing. So distraction can be a good thing for advertising, especially when it comes to audio, especially when it comes to radio, a medium that is often playing in the background. You're not really paying your full attention to it. And we found that sound is a very powerful, slow-burning medium to get into your brain. So really there's a lot of strategies that involved getting the most out of a distracted audience involved using a lot of radio. This all sounds very nice and very pretty. There's one caveat, and that is that you need more exposures before you see the effect. With people who are paying full attention, you see the effect more quickly, but it's after one exposure, it's already the effect that you see. With distracted people, the effect can be much higher, but it takes longer for it to take effect. You need more exposures. And that led us to the study that we did most recently. And the study, we looked into the magic of repetition. And the core question of this comes from the study we did before, namely, what is the optimal contact frequency? How many contacts do you need for the effect to be optimal? And is there a way to go over it? Or what happens when you go over it? That's a study we did, the magic of repetition, looking into this topic. I will briefly explain how we did this study to you. Take a look into the kitchen. And one of the core principles that we wanted to include in this study, there were three. And one of them, the first one, is that we wanted to keep it as close to reality as possible. The way people consume advertising is not with their full attention, but with some sort of distraction. So we wanted to replicate that in our studies, in our neuroscience studies. And we did that by inviting a group of 40 participants into the research lab of our research partner. And they were invited into a living room type of setting where they were exposed to different pieces of TV content and different pieces of radio content. So they listened to the radio and watched TV as they would normally. And around the programs, we put advertising blocks. And while they were in this living room setting, we gave them a small tablet with several games, and they could choose a game to play to mimic a little bit the different multimedial mode that you might be in when you're consuming advertising. It looks a little bit like this. Might be a familiar setting for you when you're watching TV or when you're listening to the radio. There's something else you're doing at the same time. So really to get this distracted audience effect in. So we wanted to keep it as close to reality as possible. And the second principle of the study was that we wanted to focus on attention. So as I said, it's a neuroscience study, so we gave people these cute little hats, so we could really measure what amount of attention they have in their brain, and so we could see how much attention there is, but also how attractive the ads are that they're seeing or listening to. And lastly, last principle that we did, and something that's not often done in neuroscience studies. Most often you have one session with a group of participants and then that's it. What we did, because we wanted to focus on the contact frequency, so how many, we really needed to ramp up the amount of exposures you can have. And you are sort of limited if you want to do it in a realistic setting. With content and stuff. You're sort of limited in one session how many exposures you can do in one session. And with our setup, with the realistic stuff and calibration of the brain, we could do in each session a maximum of 4 contacts. So what we did is something that's not often done in neuroscience studies. We had this group of 40 participants come back for 3 sessions, which really allowed us to look into the effects of the campaign over a course of 12 contacts. They came back in the course of 1 month to the research lab, so we could really track the progress that the actual additional number of exposures had on them. For the test ads, we did a mix of different categories: small brands, medium brands, different type of campaigns, activation or brand building campaigns, to really get a more full picture of how this works. So these were the three main principles of the study, all focused to answer one simple question: what is a pinch of salt, or what is the optimal contact frequency? And to share the key results with you, I will divide it into two parts. So the first question we have is, of course, how many exposures do you need at a minimum? So what's the where in, and what happens if you go over it? And are there any differences between the type of objective you have? So if you have a brand building campaign versus a sales focused campaign, and what are the differences between radio and TV? I will give you some actual numbers, and what's good to remember in terms of when you're thinking of contact frequency of how many exposures, is that a media plan is depending on several different ingredients. So you have your creative and your share of voice or the competition, which all in the end also depend on how much actual context you need. So this study serves more as a guideline to give you an idea of how many contacts you need. And if you want to translate that into a specific advertiser type of situation, you can look at this situation and adjust if needed. So basically what I'm saying is that you can take this with a little bit of salt, a grain of salt. But the first question is, of course, how many exposures do you need at a minimum? So how many do you need to for an ad to wear in? So the phase where the amount of attention people have for an ad is still growing, attention is slowly increasing. And if there's one number that you want to remember from this study, is that in most cases you need about 3 to 4 exposures for a creative to wear in. And that's sort of for most objectives, the minimum amount of times someone needs to see or hear an ad before you reach the wear-in phase. If you have less than 3 or 4, it's okay. It's not bad. It's just a little bit like my food. It tends to taste a little bit bland. There's more potential to it. What happens if you have more than 3 to 4? Is there something like too many exposures? And it's something that I would like to talk about is wear out. And maybe you've heard of it, but wear out is a topic that is often researched in when it comes to communication research. And there's sort of 2 theories of it. If what happens if you have too high number of exposures. So the first theory is that if you increase the number of exposures you have, that the brand effects diminish. So your brand image goes down or your preference goes down because of the high number of contacts. The second theory that is often mentioned in terms of wear out is that it doesn't go down, but instead it plateaus. So when you reach a certain level of awareness or preference, it doesn't go up anymore, and any additional contacts are mainly used to maintain what you have built up in the previous context. In our study, we found more evidence for the second theory, so that the brand effects plateau. At some point, you reach a maximum or the height of the effect, and additional contacts are mainly used to maintain what you have built up before that. And another subject that is often mentioned within this topic is the topic of annoyance. So if you see an ad so often that you become annoyed by it, but it's good to remember that annoyance is definitely something else than wear out. There have been studies done into the topic of annoyance, and one study they had a group of participants and they showed an ad in a very high number of exposures. So they had a group of respondents and they played an ad a lot of times. And afterwards, they measured how irritated they were with the brand, but also how what the brand awareness was, what the preference was, all these brand type of KPIs. So what they found immediately after the high number of exposures was indeed the annoyance was very high. So people were very annoyed after the high number of exposures. But on the other hand, they also saw that the brand awareness was very high. So despite feeling a little bit annoyed, everyone also knew who the brand was. What's interesting was they did a follow-up survey 6 weeks later without the higher number of exposures, just to ask how's the annoyance, how's the brand awareness, how are those type of things. And what's interesting is that 6 weeks later, they found that the annoyance that they saw had disappeared. was mostly gone. But the brand effects, the high brand awareness that they saw earlier had remained. And what's even more interesting is that the preference for the brand had grown afterwards. So despite being initially annoyed, after 6 weeks, they still had the same brand effects, and some became even stronger than before. So annoyance is not the same as wear out, and in our study we mainly found that the effects that you see from a higher number of contacts is mainly plateauing. So you're basically maintaining the effects that you had before. And this could be an interesting time to, if you have an ad, maybe use a shorter version, or maybe add additional tag on or an add-on to an ad to give it a slightly new edge. But you want to build up you want to maintain what you've already built up. And when this plateauing stabilization part of a campaign starts, that's different for depending on the objective and the medium that you're using. I will tell you a bit more about that. So if your objective is to build more long-term brand campaign, so some things like building brand awareness or building a certain brand image, more long-term objectives, one of the key things that you want to focus on is making sure that people understand your message, so that your message cuts through into the minds of people. And to do that in the study, we could look at mental attention. So that's a metric that you can that tells us how much space there is in the head of the participant to process a message. The higher it is, the more easy it is to learn a message, and the more easier it is to internalize a message. So what we found to optimize this mental attention to build brand image, for both TV or radio, you need at least 4 exposures. So 4 exposures before the effect starts to wear in. And afterwards you see a phase of plateauing. So basically you're maintaining what you've built up in the previous 4 exposures. So there's no difference between TV and radio in this aspect. But what is interesting, what they do differ in, is that the intensity between TV and radio differs. And the intensity is actually much stronger when it comes to audio. So we found that the mental attention people have, especially in those first few contacts, is much higher when people are exposed to the radio ads. And we found that messages can come across about 1.5 times more strongly through radio compared to TV. So especially if you're building a brand image or brand awareness, radio really gives you that quick build up in terms of mental attention, in terms of building a foundation for a brand message. And from a previous study, we've learned also how to combine those two. And if you have a brand building campaign and you want to incorporate both of these media types, it helps to actually start first with the radio part of the campaign, building a certain music or a certain message or a certain voice, really building the audio part of the campaign. So when they see the visual part, the TV part later, they have something that they recognize already, so the audio part. But because the images are new afterwards, it will give it another dimension or a new layer of interest, which increases the amount of attention people have for the TV ad. So by using radio first, you're actually giving your TV campaign later a boost. And if you want to specify it down in terms of exposures, ideally you would start with a radio campaign first that has about 4 to 10 exposures, and then follow up with a TV campaign that has at least 4 exposures as well. The other objective that you might have is more short-term based, so more focused on sales, things like increasing purchase behavior or specifying a specific call to action, getting people to do something. And for that, in the mind, you want to look at desire, and that desire gives tells us how attractive the advertising is or the message is, and the higher the desire, the more attractive, the more likely you are to do something with it. And whereas we saw with the brand building aspect that there was not really a difference in amount of exposures between TV and radio, here we do see a difference between both media types. For TV, we see that it can build up desire pretty quickly, so you need only 3 to 4 exposures for it to wear in, and afterwards you reach the phase of plateauing, so it stays. You're basically maintaining what you built up in the context before. Radio is again an interesting, it differs interestingly from TV in this aspect, as in that it starts lower, so it takes longer before the desire is built up. You need at least 5 exposures for it to wear in. But what's interesting about radio is that there's no plateauing taking place. So each additional contact continues building additional desire, so additional interest from the consumer. So it starts lower than TV, but in the long term, it becomes much stronger in terms of increasing desire. Making it an excellent medium if you have an activation campaign that is not focused on a specific season or type, but if you are more focused on long term, if you are not seasonal based, or if you want to increase activation throughout the year. If you want to combine it in an optimal manner, you want to start with TV first in this case. So you have first the quick desire build up, giving people an idea of what they're getting, and then follow up with a radio campaign where you can really extend the built-up desire from TV. So again, to combine this with the number of exposures, you want to have at least 3 to 4 exposures for TV, and then follow with a radio campaign with at least 5 exposures, and until your budget allows it, basically. So radio is really a long-term medium for building short-term activation. If you would combine those two media, if you look at it in a different way, radio you can see as more of a store brand salt, the type that's fairly cheap, fairly cost effective, but forms an important base of all your dishes. So you can use a lot of it without doing too much of an investment in it, and it's very multi-applicable to any type of dish. Whereas if you look at TV, it's a more expensive type of salt, so it's a bit more exclusive, and it can be used to give additional crunch or specific type of flair to a dish compared to radio. Both are needed for a good dish, but both have their own roles and both have, of course, their own price points. But they are good. They each have their own strengths. So to sum up, what is a pinch of salt? The short answer is that it's not too little, not too much. In most cases, you need about 3 to 4 exposures for minimal to wear in, and especially in this kitchen, radio is a very important role. On one hand, it can be very strong to build brands. It can very quickly build up mental attention to get your message across, building brands in the long term. And also for short-term activation is actually good for a long-term activation campaign for short-term behavior, making it basically a key ingredient of any campaign. As I said before, salt is one part of all the dishes, what makes a meal great. Depending on your creative, your competitive situation, the share of voice, you can need it. You can use these guidelines to adjust based on the specific situation. But it's a little bit more concrete than just a pinch of salt. We've put these results in a white paper, and we also have an English version of that. I will share a QR code with you later. But for now, I would like to end on this message.
Well, thank you so much, Sheng, for all your attention on salt. Well, Ster did a lot of neuroscience studies, and what do you think in our brain make that radio is so strong, so direct? I mean, is that a brain thing, or what is it?
I think it's mostly the power of audio, because audio is something that is, if you're distracted, for example, if you're on a couch or whatever, and audio is the thing that can pull your attention from whatever you're doing. So if you hear something, you're more likely to look up, or it moves quicker. Sound is processed quicker than visual stimuli. So I think that's really the power of audio, to really work in the background, and when it's relevant, it gives you a sign that...
Audio gets always the attention first.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a quicker emotional response.
Exactly.
I think neuroscience studies did react on that. Are there any questions from out of the audience just before we have our attention for the lunch? Gary.
I have a quick question. When you talk about the number of exposures, do you have a sense of over how much time?
For our study, we did it over... the study took place over a course of a month. And we had them come back in 3 sessions. So the first session was, for example, Monday, week 1. They came back the second week on Monday, and then 2 weeks later again on Monday. So we spread it out over a month of time for each participant.
So every time you talked about the number of exposures, you were talking about over a month.
Yeah. That's what it's doing.
Can we say then 12 exposure for a month if you force the base for radio?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's a good number to live across. Are there any other questions for Sheng? Or are you...
Please.
Familiar to those that don't want to take any responsibility for people that they have easily, the raise of their blood pressure. So, that's why it's a pinch of salt. Because if you specify a spoon, maybe they have a heart attack.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's juridical. Well, thank you so much. I want to end with, you said I have nothing with Formula One, but we have got a very good Dutch driver, Max Verstappen. So the metaphor is on that for you.
Thank you.
Then we have the tires, the Formula One car, and the driver. I see you back again at 2 o'clock sharp in this room. Please have some daylight and some lunch, and see you back in an hour.